Final Fantasy XV director and JP Games founder Hajime Tabata has detailed his next project, the RPG called the Pegasus Dream Tour, inspired by and created in partnership with Paralympic Games. The game marks Tabata's first project since he departed Square Enix last year and founded JP Games. At the time, Tabata noted his departure was in pursuit of a project he described as his next challenge after Final Fantasy XV. Tabata says in a statement that the studio aims to represent the wonders that are unique to Paralympic sports through the upcoming RPG. With this video game, we want to contribute to the future growth of the Paralympic Games, not just as a sporting event, but as entertainment as well, with contents that we hope will have lasting value in the future. Said Tabata, the Pegasus Dream Tour itself is being created through a partnership with the International Paralympic Committee, a partnership that the organization hopes will boost interest in the upcoming 2020 Paralympic Games. Veteran designers know well that difficulty encompasses a lot more than scaling numbers up through its medium and hard modes. It's a powerful tool to teach players about managing physical power and spatial relationships, and engage them more deeply by giving them agency over how they overcome challenges. To get some insight into wielding that tool, we reached out to designers to ask about how they grappled with specific difficulty issues in their games. How do you incentivize players to master sophisticated maneuvers? How do you craft a role-playing game that can accommodate players who struggle with combat? And how do you structure challenging encounters in MMORPG in a way that goes beyond making stats gradually increase? How they responded to this challenges provides key insights you can take with you for your next RPG. When working out how to seal conceptualize difficulty in their game, many designers align it with the experience curve. Difficulty does not merely represent discrete challenges to be overcome, but perfect execution of skills, but rather it gives the player a satisfying loop that makes them gladly assume thoroughly that the game is putting them in. This is designer Zoey Wikstrom's preferred way of designing games, working at Blind Squirrel Games, a company that does contract work for titles like XCOM, Anime Unknown, Evolve, Disney Infinity Tour. She frequently works and thinks about difficulty design, primarily on her internal and personal projects. At Wikstrom lays the groundwork by using difficulty curves to teach players how to accomplish the more elaborate tasks a game lays out for them, cementing the base layer for a fantasy or imaginative experience, separating hard from an obstacle worth overcoming. When working on these problems on, say, turn-based games, she explains, we want the combat to be tactical and difficult, but we'll have that pinpoint what it is that testers find difficult, whether it was an obtuse interface, or the challenge of taking enemies out. How do we get players to that point? This is not entirely a question about tutorials. It's about breaking down the components of the desired action towards what's worth interacting with, and setting the challenge bar for the interactions to make the maneuver worth it. It becomes a matter of asking testers, okay, do this maneuver, and then seeing how long it takes them to execute it, graphing it out, and seeing where the points move. Wikstrom explains, going forward, difficulty then becomes about pulling layered executions of those maneuvers out of players, hopefully by X hours. That interface is not a barrier to interacting with things, she says. The best way to give them a bit more challenge is to throw more things at them at once. This layered groundwork becomes a foundation for letting players give You date it on what sensations or actions are, is in, and heard for them in your game. In RPGs then, the next step is to let the player figure out which challenges are worth overcoming, and which they will want to temper themselves against. Freelance designer Wikstrom, currently contracting at Riot Games, has worked on everything from the Neverwinter Nights expansion Shadows of Undrentide, to Clive Barker's Jericho, to a recent free-to-play mobile games like Blade, out of Elysion. His design work has taken him across a variety of genres, but his Neverwinter Nights experience gives him a lot of ways to explain difficulty with top-level play strategies in mind. Since one has a fully codified rule set developed by Wizards of the Coast and Bioware, his difficulty work likewise came from thinking about encounter placement and tracking player skill and experience. He found it best to design encounters backwards, image via Mobygames. In Neverwinter Nights, when you set up an encounter, you know the difficulty of it, because you know the power level and experience level required for a party of a given size. First, you work in reverse. You do the final encounter. You say, we want players to make it to level 80 and to 20. And then at the halfway point, they need to be around level 12. And then work back and say, they are starting at 1. The biggest difficulty, Ernst says, is that you have no idea what party combinations players will bring to a given encounter, or what skill sets. That does not mean encounters need to be blandly defeatable by any given party composition though. It just means you need to send out encounters that will go differently for different types. If one player builds out a rogue character group that specializes in quick attacks, one fight might go well, while another might prove more challenging, and that works out okay, so long as they have the ability to change their tactics and strategy for the situation. Like Wikstrom, he's not a fan of letting the player select, is it difficult or hard when playing a game. In Neverwinter Nights, Ernst could use player choice during gameplay choice, or raise the difficulty curve depending on the desired experience. Take Persuasion. For instance, he says, Persuasion in Neverwinter Nights could let you skip some combat scenarios, or get extra items like fire resistance rings, or healing potions. Those help to keep players from getting hosed when they enter required combat scenarios. It's essentially allowing players to adjust the difficulty based on their character build. Built-in cautions to make sure your build trees do not wind up working against the fun parts of your own game. If the player likes hacking and puts their points into a hacker build, the hacking minigame could become too easy and therefore too boring. He notes, what that player should be doing is, since they do not like high combat, they put all their points into combat, so that becomes the cakewalk instead of hacking. In a poorly tuned build-based difficulty curve, players wind up encouraged to put points into the things they do not want to spend time doing, so that it can be ignored and difficulty focused elsewhere. With the new Guild Wars 2 expansion Heart of Thorns, introducing raids and raid bosses to the Guild Wars 2 ecosystem, game director Colin Johanson is able to explain how his game's general design philosophy gets refined and honed from encounters that scale for player groups of various sizes. As Johanson explains, in normal Guild Wars 2 group encounters, difficulty is scaled based on the number of players who be entered the zone and are in fighting range of the encounter. The game takes this number, increases the number of monsters in the encounter, then swaps out certain enemies, or gives them different abilities to put pressure against the increased player base. Since all classes have access to abilities and builds that let them damage enemies, control enemies, or support other players, They use new abilities and counter strategies centered around these 3 core skill types to force players into adapting the skills they have already mastered or trying out skill combinations they had not thought of before. But Johanson says that this all changes when fixed 10-player raids enter the equation. We have a giant list of mechanics available to us that our creatures can use, and the way we set up our encounters is we say, for this encounter, this is the combination of mechanics we want to use, and these are the player skills that will counter them. To test the difficulty of these encounters, Johanson's colleagues at ArenaNet set raiding parties that take on his team's encounters. He and his team set the planned difficulty as high as possible by implementing a given set of boss abilities on timing.